Hi, Gwilym. How are you this fine day? It's absolutely gorgeous here.
It is nice, isn't it? Yes, I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, no, it's great. I've been spending time this morning chasing the tortoise around the garden, trying to get him to eat chicory.
Okay, a couple of things. Chasing the tortoise. Are you okay? I know you hurt your foot a while ago.
I did have COVID last week, so I am sort of in the post-COVID recovery phase. I tried to play squash yesterday. That was a mistake. So chasing the tortoise around the garden is probably the extent of my exercise at the moment.
Excellent, right? But you caught the tortoise and gave it some chicory.
Chicory, yeah. Chicory's really good because it's otherwise he eats a rubbish diet of the kids give him things like lettuce and the like, and it's not good. Too much water. Chicory, much less water content, much more kind of vegetation in there. He absolutely loves it. He then runs away with it as if I'm going to take it back off him. So his first movement is to snatch it out of my hand and then try and get away as quickly as he can, just in case I'm just going to...
Are you sure this has more like a dog than a tortoise? You know what tortoises look like, don't you? They've got shells and...
Yeah, no,
he's a big waggly tail and is it all hairy?
He's definitely a tortoise. No, he does. He does wag his tail though. He is a tail wagging tortoise.
A running, chicory grabbing, tail wagging tortoise.
Yeah, there you go.
Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the two IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property, brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
Shall we? Anyway, we've got a podcast to crack on with. We've got two really special guests with us today, and we've got an extra special guest who's hiding in the background somewhere, who may or may not speak. So our really special guests are John Ogier and Ruth Soetendorp from IPAN, the Intellectual Property Awareness Network. I nearly said that without stumbling.
I'm pleased you can say intellectual property properly.
Intellectual Property Awareness Network, IPAN. And we've got Stephen Jones lurking in the background, who past president of CIPA, who's also involved himself in IPAN in recent years. Stephen may or may not participate. Depends if we can kind of nudge him in later on. Let's see if we can. John, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Thank you, Lee. Yes, I'm John Ogier, and I'm here in sunny Guernsey. And I am the chairman of IPAN. I've been the chairman of IPAN since, 2016, and we have an absolutely great board. I do some work as an intellectual property economist, but I've retired from my main working profession when I was Registrar of Intellectual Property on the island and set up the island's Intellectual Property Office with its legislation and worked with the law officers and policy on international agreements on IP.
Fantastic. I mean, maybe we can maybe we'll touch a little bit on that work as we go through, if that's okay. Ruth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Ruth Soetendorp, and I've been involved with IPAN since the early 1990s, where I was fortunate enough to be brought in at the time of John Mackay-Reid, who founded IPAN and was a renowned and respected past president of CIPA. I've been involved in intellectual property education for over 3 decades. And intellectual property education has come to have the meaning of teaching IP and IP concepts to people who are IP creators. So there's always, for a lot longer, there's been teaching of intellectual property as a law subject in law schools, but it's only in the past 3 decades that a light has begun to be shone on the importance of the people who actually generate intellectual property rights, learning something about them and the impact they have on creative and commercial life whilst they're undergoing higher education and these days even while they're in school. So that's always been my absolute passion in IPAN, and IPAN has been a great supporter and a great vehicle for advances in the field of IP education.
Fantastic. And I'm sure we're going to talk quite a bit about the various educational activities that IPAN involves itself in. Stephen, can you say hello, Stephen Jones? You're able to say hello to us? Is that
yes, right? I can say hello. And I've been involved with IPAN for the last few years, and it's got a great commitment to increasing the general awareness of IP, particularly from the educational point of view, for its members and beyond its members. And one of the things I did was an event that was designed at promoting awareness of IP among small business owners. And that is certainly something that I think IPAN and indeed all the professional bodies can have a role in doing for the future.
Fantastic. That's great. It's great to have you on. So let's talk a little bit about the mission of IPAN, shall we? I think we were chatting before we started the recording, and we know IPAN's been around for 30 years now. So congratulations, if that's the right thing you say to an organisation as it hits 30. Congratulations for your longevity. I myself was involved in IPAN when I first joined CIPA, because one of the things that I found out early doors, which I didn't know, was that I was a director of IPAN. So I sat on the board for a wee while until the time seemed right to hand that over to others to represent CIPA in that. So I myself have got a little bit of an understanding of what IPAN is and how it works. But John, Ruth, or Stephen, whoever wants to take a lead on this, do you want to kind of give us the run through in terms of what IPAN is all about?
I can kick off. We recently had a strategy day to see if we could, in one of our items, just condense what IPAN does into one meaningful statement. And if I can just share that with you now and just unpack a few points, and then perhaps invite Ruth or Stephen to build on it. We came up with this statement: IPAN's mission is to provide an holistic approach to IP through thought leadership in areas of education, industry, and policy making. Holistic means we cover all the areas of IP, trademarks, patents, trade secrets, copyright, geographical indicators, database, and also the application of IP in industry and the education of IP. And we have particular links through the UK IPO and link into the policy making and thought leadership. I would say as well, we're so grateful to CIPA. IPAN was really birthed out of CIPA, and we continue that strong relationship and have always had strong CIPA representation on our board, Stephen being the most recent, but I would also mention Dr. Steve Smith as well as John Reed.
Thanks, John. Thank you for that. Ruth, do you want to add anything?
Well, only to say that I think that IPAN continues to go where other organisations don't. I think it is unique, and I think that some of the contributions that it has made in the past and continues to make are unique, and it does benefit from the capacity to see IP in a different light, probably a perspective of the user. So Stephen mentioned the successful event that he organised a couple of months ago for small and medium-sized enterprises. We had an event just last week where we brought IPAN, University of the Arts London and IPO together in a room for a terrific evening where we listened to the new non-exec director, Harriet Kelsall, who is herself a master jeweller, and Roxanne Peters, who is taking a radical approach to IP education at the Arts University, and a recent arts graduate. That coming together of the IPO, an institution dealing with creativity, and a creative young entrepreneur, I don't think would happen in any other forum. Now, IPAN has done that, and hopefully IPAN will continue to tread that kind of untrodden ground, which is its particular speciality.
How high does IPAN set its sights? Because I would say that you guys have your work cut out for you a little bit in relation to IP awareness. We're seeing, we have lots of chats with lots of interesting people on these podcasts, actually, and they're as good way as any of keeping your kind of finger on the pulse of what's going on with IP. And after all these years, one feels that IP still is coming out as the culprit in some fairly high-level policy areas at the moment. One that we're always talking about is the vaccine waiver, where IP is being blamed for the failure to roll out vaccines to developing countries and so on. Is it the case that do you aim that high, or do you find that, did you leave that to other policy-making bodies?
Influence as far as policy making goes, I think extends to our annual event that we have held at the Houses of Parliament to celebrate World IP Day, which John might want to say a bit more about, and our briefing documents, which we've supplied to members of Parliament. But policy making, I think, probably comes in a more tangential or organic way in trying to influence the people who themselves are working with IP and themselves may be wanting to influence intellectual property. I'm still teaching. I teach on an undergraduate and a postgraduate program at City University, and the module is called Intellectual Property Management. But I've had to shift over the last 3 years quite significantly in how I approach the topic. The actual nuts and bolts of intellectual property are far more accessible, as you'll know, than they were 5 or 10 years ago. If you point someone in the right direction, they can find out what a patent is and what copyright means. But what has to be kind of put in is this whole ethical dimension to intellectual property has taken up a lot more of space in the minds of people who are working with IP, and that has to be reflected in the classroom too. So IP as a topic is changing. It's not that's my perception, and IPAN is well placed, and I think we saw it last week, well placed to pick up these more tangential aspects of intellectual property, its management, its impact in the business world as they kind of change in the early part of the 21st century.
I know I've been hearing more and more about kind of IP and ethics in the same sentence. I have to say, when I joined the profession, I think people would have shaken their heads quite why they would ever appear as related entities. It's amazing how they've come closer and closer together. And of course, the politicization of intellectual property as well. The number of comments I've heard over the last few years about how impossible it would be to achieve the levels of harmonization that we were managing, 10, 20, 30 years ago, things seem to have moved on terribly. So, yeah, I think every element we can get of enhancing awareness feels really important to me.
As an intellectual property economist as well, I think we have to recognise that right at the heart of the IP is the tension. On the one hand, we want to promote long-term investment, innovation and creativity, and we need to reward that. On the other hand, if you provide protection around a market, you inevitably get higher prices. That's what the return is about. And for example, in the pharmaceutical industry and in research, you would never have the pharmaceutical advances that we've got if it were not for IP. And that's the fundamental point. But then when you look at the great power and great advantage which can come to companies and some now major areas of the intangible IP space owned by a few individuals worth billions of pounds on this planet, you have to then ask, with the great need in areas in the world, and this really was brought into focus with the COVID pandemic and the vaccines which were developed, but there are other areas in food production, etc., and plant breeding and ownership of IP rights. How can these be made available and affordable to the millions of people, billions of people in this planet? And there has to be that ethical dimension. And the IP world, I think, is struggling on its journey to accommodate this. But we're in IPAN definitely part of that journey. And also, if you look at the area, for example, of ethnicity, is it right for the ethnicity to be appropriated into IP? Now, so there's some real issues for us to grapple with in the world of IP and take IP forward in the 21st century.
One of the interesting things about actually intellectual property that I've noticed is that quite often ethical issues hit IP before they hit other areas, which is surprising in a way, because you think of it as a sort of a slight legal, one might think of it as a legal backwater. But I guess part of the issue is that new things tend to hit into the intellectual property world first, because the intellectual property world needs to know about them for legal reasons. An example of that is AI, for example. I think the IP community is commenting enormously strongly at the moment on that area, because they're seeing it and the possible implications before many other sectors really get on top of it. Yeah. I was actually going to ask you, we touched on this in a recent podcast as well, actually, about the sustainability side of things. Another area where IP is, I think, having to rethink itself a bit is in its impact on the environment more broadly and sustainability. Are you hearing this coming up in your conversations?
I think we really need to understand this, and one of the international agreements, which is actually part of the intellectual property world, though it's tangential to it, is the Rio Convention on Biodiversity. That you can't just go and take some genetic material out of a jungle, often learning from the indigenous people's local knowledge of medical application of plants, and then patent it. And then those very drugs which are developed, or foods that are developed, are then often not available at a price that the indigenous people can afford. Now, the Rio Convention on Biodiversity ensures, or should ensure, that there is some benefit back to the indigenous people and to their communities, and that, if it works, can be made to work properly, and it is beginning to work, particularly, for example, on the Nagoya Protocol, means that there can be reward in preserving rainforest, in preserving nature, and working with indigenous communities.
Sustainability, benefits a lot from the United Nations formulation of 17 different areas, of which IP is predominantly in one or two, but also significantly in several others. And that's provided a way in to talking about sustainability and IP in the same sentence. But coming back to ethics and IP, I think is a great contributor to smaller countries, finding their identity and their sense of self-confidence. And I had a very interesting example in a class where I asked my postgraduate students to bring examples from their culture, IP ethical issues. And as far as Jamaica is concerned, it's intellectual property that is driving a kind of a review of Jamaica's approach to its indigenous music and its indigenous food, but it's definitely a key to finding greater confidence and greater ability to sort of assert themselves as a nation and an economy. So we're not seeing IP just as this is what the law says, these are what the regulations are. You cannot anymore talk about IP when you're trying to make people aware of it in contexts limited to regulation and legislation. It's much more permeating people's commercial life, and it benefits, I think, from that. That's an addition. I think the thing I was going to say before was that the notion of awareness. Awareness is a big word in IPAN's title. And I think one of the things that's come out, and I was with Janet Burgess, who is doing the research for us, who spent some time at CIPA's offices and through old copies of the CIPA journal. And what seemed to come out was that when it was first thought of, when the IP awareness group was first thought of, the awareness at stake was that of the patent attorney community themselves. And reading those early editions, the feeling is that perhaps the patent attorney community needed a slightly broader awareness of the ramifications of IP. And out of that grew this concept that, well, other people need to be aware, everybody needs to be aware. And
Shall we talk a little bit about World IP Day? Because I know that's always a big landmark in the IPAN calendar. I know World IP Day because it follows shortly after World Plumbing Day, which obviously is a more significant landmark in the world celebratory calendar. But
so is World Plumbing Day in the pipeline then, Lee?
Back towards the end of March, mate.
Oh, okay.
Put it in your diary. You'll normally see the thing that tends to trend on Twitter is it's Hug a Plumber Day. So put it in your diary for next year, and if you're anywhere near me, just give me a little cuddle.
Remind me of the day again, just in case.
I'll
send you a little diary invite, shall I, afterwards?
Thank you.
Let's talk about World IP Day. John, over to you.
Well, yes, thanks, Lee. Thank you for this opportunity just to share about our last World IP Day when we were able to celebrate it in the Houses of Parliament, because it kind of answers the question as well as what is IPAN able to do. We are, after all, a very small organisation, but we are in a privileged position of being able to bring together so many different component parts. And I thought I'd just share with you just a little bit of a flavour of our last World IP Day, which was held in April 2019. We had an invitation to attend the Terrace Pavilion at the Houses of Parliament through the All IP Parliamentary Committee, which is chaired by Pete Wishart MP. This is cross-party and is there is support for intellectual property, though often very little understanding of what it is across parties. And the particular issue there was Brexit, which was quite controversial in terms of, for the motor industry, so many different aspects, not just of physical components, but of licenses and of components and of joint venture innovations, whether that would cease and how that was all going to work. And we put on a seminar which invited leaders from across the motor industry, leaders in the IP profession, MPs, and all those who were interested, with the question, is innovation in the UK motor industry heading for the exit? And we had some great speakers. We had Dr. Mandri Chandran Ramesh, who is involved in the Oxbotica innovation with Oxford University, and that's about innovation with driverless vehicles, and Professor Newman. We had David Wong, who's the Senior Technology and Innovation Manager for the motor industry, and Dr. Stephen Lambert, who is Head of Automation for McLaren Formula One in applied battery technologies. And the session was introduced by Pete Wishart, the All-Party Chair, and the Conservative then Intellectual Property Minister, Chris Skidmore, gave a short speech and message where he said that we needed to found the UK economy on the innovation and imagination of the British people and its industries. And that brought together a whole group of people and understanding and shared communication.
I think the World IP Day, as has been at the House of Parliament pre-COVID, has been an amazing opportunity to give the IPAN membership an opportunity to hear sort of quality and contemporary presentations, and to network, and to be at the House of Parliament, and to be part of something that's sort of real and vibrant, associated with intellectual property, and a few MPs turn up as well, which is great. But I don't know if it's on your list to mention, Lee, but I would like to just make sure we don't forget saying that one of the bigger steps forward that IPAN made during the pandemic was to team up with the Global Women Inventor and Innovator Network. I don't know if you've heard of GWIN and its founding CEO, Dr. Bola Olabisi, but what we've said to Bola is that GWIN, Global Women Innovator and Inventor Network, is something that IPAN wants to be associated with and can see benefit in. And we've had 2 years of a woman innovator and a woman inventor being awarded the IPAN Intellectual Property Prize, which is a great, again, PR for IPAN, but PR for IP. And the winner receives a half-a-day consultation with the IPAN board members on IP as it relates to her future business. The first winner, it was a London woman, Patience Nwadu, who invented the cake carrier, the Tubo cake carrier, and she got the prize because of her own bat. She had pursued design, trademark and patent registration for the product. Patent registration didn't succeed, but the trademark and the design registration did. And that kind of initiative on part of a sort of a sole person working on their own without any support was really, we felt, to be encouraged. So I think IPAN's association with GWIN has been something good to come out of Corona.
The prize is a great prize. To be a startup or an inventor and to have the panel's time and their thoughts, their guidance. I remember last we held it online. Maybe in the future, post-COVID, we'll be able to have it in person. But to have the likes of Stephen Jones and all his expertise, and Ruth and Mandy Haberman and Dr. Janice Denoncourt and Nigel Worth, and to have it was interactive, wasn't it, Ruth?
It's like Dragon's Den, but with people who know what they're talking about.
The one thing we've not touched on, although you sort of, Ruth certainly mentioned it, and you talked about some of the people involved there, John, is that IPAN is, of course, at heart a membership organisation. Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the kinds of people that you have in membership and what they bring, and maybe how you aspire to increase the membership?
Yes, I think that's that has been one of our challenges during during the COVID era. How we get that delivery into our membership. We in terms of numbers, we have about sort of 40 to 50 organisations like CIPA, like CIPMA, and various institutes. But actually, at the heart of it, it's people in those organisations who share that vision and that commitment to making IP available beyond the boundaries in which it's normally available, through which can be quite expensive consultations in the legal or professional professions. And that really goes right back to our founder, Dr. Reid. Dr. John Reid was a member of CIPA. He'd been a practicing patent attorney, but he was someone who wanted to see IP extended to the wider community and make IP available.
But yes, he said. I think he comes from the CIPA patent community, and I think what sort of got him going and where he found traction within CIPA was that he was talking about a subject that the CIPA community could relate to. And when I met him, he was already thinking, how can we extend IP awareness beyond the CIPA community? And my first outing with John Reid was to the Institute of Engineers, where we had a very good discussion with their education people about how IP could appear in the training of engineers. And that mantle fell to Graham Barber, who was a long-standing IPAN member and pushed IP awareness in the engineering field via IPAN most significantly. And I think, if it hadn't been for John's Mackay Reid's vision, I don't think we would be in the position we are today. But the position we are in today, I think really it behoves IPAN, and you said at the beginning you wanted us to look to the future, and I think IPAN has really got to sort of take stock. And IPAN, when you talk about IPAN, you're talking about the board, the people, the nucleus, to try and identify. We've come a long way in 30 years. We've got tremendous things that we've achieved, and we can look back on with pride. But the next 5, 10 to 30 years are going to make different demands on an organisation like IPAN. And I think we've got a lot of, we started with the strategy meeting and we came up with a very adaptable and very appropriate sentence that describes what we're about, but how that goes into practice, how that reflects in growing numbers, which will give us the sort of economic sound base to do the work that we want to do, is going to be quite a challenge. And expect to hear more about that, I think, in the future. When we see the report, which will be out, I think, probably, I hope, before the end of the year, that Janet Burgess is working on, that may contain some clues as to, where our future lies.
Just to everyone who's listening, like to, extend the, the invitation to link up with our website and become a member. But also we're looking for new board members as well. And don't think we are looking from the IP professions and our membership, but maybe you're the young end of the spectrum and starting out, but really share our vision and our values and want to get that message out to younger people and have skills in social media and different areas where we want to be able to take IPAN in the future. So, if you're out there and you're listening and you can see, yes, this is something we'd like to be part of, please do get in touch with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for spending your time with us, and also to Stephen for joining in. Before we close, I normally do kind of like a whizzy closing question, but I know that Gwilym's been practicing and would quite like to have a go at this. But just before we give Gwilym the opportunity to do the closing question, is there anything else from a IPAN perspective that you would like to get across, or do you think we've pretty much covered everything?
No, just to say thank you to you, yes, Lee and Gwilym, for this and our partnership with CIPA. We appreciate it.
Agreed.
Go on then, Gwilym. The moment of stardom now. Closing.
I know.
Question.
I don't know. You're so professional. I just want to be you, Lee. But so you always go for a question for everybody, but I've got a little quiz and I've cheated because I know the answer because I checked it on Google a moment ago. But congratulations, first of all, on your 30th anniversary. Big one, of course. Traditionally, you'd get pearls. More modern area, you'd get diamonds, but hopefully you're doing better things with your funds than all of that, of course. The question is, if this is your 29th anniversary, which obviously would be a bit less exciting, what material or gift would you be expecting? Anyone? Does anyone know? This is a long shot. And I think you'll be surprised by the answer if you don't know it.
I don't know it, and I'm not going to Google. That would be...
No, what do you reckon, Lee? It's not chicory.
It can't be chicory, can it? It's going to be... Oh, it's not tortoiseshell, is it?
That'd be so cool, but no.
Oh, okay. That was my go then.
Any guesses, John?
So is it a rose?
Nice try. No, it is not a rose. No, but it's a nice try. Ruth?
I haven't got the foggiest idea. Cadmium.
Mother of pearl.
Cadmium, we've got mother of pearl. Well, cadmium's my fave, or any kind of radioactive metal. No, it's a little bit surprising. It's furniture.
Oh.
Furniture.
Furniture. All
I
right.
suppose, supposed to put your diamond ring on your 30th anniversary. So
Genuinely?
There you go, Lee. I'm stopping now. I think that went really, really well, that little segment.
Yeah. Can I just say, in close, a big thanks again to Ruth and to John for joining us, and for Stephen for being able to chip in from his secret location. Gwilym, you got to do some work on the closing questions, mate. That's not going to be up there with one of the greats. All right.